Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Careers Talks. Today I have my friend Bahjat. Bahjat studied with me in the same school in Jordan. Then he moved to Georgia, Atlanta, where he majored in industrial engineering. And then he started working as a data scientist in a retail analytics company. I don't know if I missed anything in this introduction. Is there anything you'd like to add, Bahjat?
No, that was spot on. Thank you, Tamer, for having me.
Of course,
it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the interview.
Let's get started then. What I'd like to understand first is, I know that you were good at mathematics in school, but what formed the decision to study industrial engineering in the US, in Georgia Tech?
To be honest, I feel like for an 18-year-old picking a major in college, there's no straightforward way of doing it. You can never be sure. It's just a hunch that you go on. I always felt that I would end up as an engineer. At least for the people in Jordan, it's either an engineer or a doctor.
Makes sense.
And the things I liked, I always thought or believed that I would end up as an engineer.
Okay.
And then it became a process of, okay, what type of engineering do you want? Mm-hmm. And my parents played a big role in what major I took. But like you said, I really liked mathematics. The industrial engineering courses that I was applying for in university, and actually when I was applying for different universities, industrial engineering wasn't the only major I applied for. Depending on the university, I picked different majors.
Interesting.
And for example, the university that I ended up in, Georgia Tech, had a very good industrial engineering course.
Yeah, it's one of the top 3 engineering schools in the US, even if not the first.
Industrial engineering, it is actually the first.
Yeah, I saw that.
Overall engineering, I think it's maybe the 8th, 10th. The ranking changes, but when I applied, it was somewhere around there.
Okay.
But like I said, when I was applying, some of the universities I applied for, I believe, for example, Waterloo in Canada, I applied for management engineering. Mm-hmm. I believe I applied for electric engineering in some of the other universities. So it really depended on the course and what the university was good in. Yeah, makes sense.
I like that you touched on how the environment, the culture, your parents all shaped that decision. And that's one thing that I'm also trying to not change, but bring more information to students choosing their major, to listen to people like you. Why did they choose what to study? And then how did they use their major to get into the job market? So thank you for mentioning that. So you did industrial engineering in Georgia Tech, correct?
Yes, correct.
And then you did or shifted to data science. So can you walk me through that shift? Like how did it happen? Because I know data science, you need to be a technical person with some knowledge of Python and these coding tools. So I would like to hear more about that.
So like I say, I think it all starts when I selected the course to study in Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, and the reason why it's top ranked in industrial engineering is the course is very flexible. Mm-hmm. So the first 2 years is the same for everybody. The last 2 years, you are allowed to specialize in one of 7 different areas within industrial engineering.
Wow, okay.
And the newest one was actually called data science and analytics.
Nice.
And during the first 2 years, you sort of take courses that are quite versatile, some of which have to do with supply chain. Other types of courses are focused on coding and specifically Python.
Nice.
And I believe it was the second semester of university where I took my first coding class. And obviously, you know that in Jordan we have no coding experience. Yeah. Even though we take some IT classes in grade 7, I wouldn't call that coding.
Yeah,
wouldn't call that
definitely
coding.
not.
So took the first coding class. And that opened up my mind. That I sort of like, I don't know, I really liked it.
Field, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, in a sense, it's very close to mathematics. It's problem solving.
Definitely.
It's critical thinking. I don't know. I just like the way you have to think in that in the computer science courses, the one I took in specific. And after that, I took more and more computer science courses, and I just liked it. And when it came time to pick the specialization or the concentration within industrial engineering, I had no doubt in my mind that I would go for data science. And like the last, I believe, year, it was I took 2 machine learning courses.
Nice.
I took 1 database or SQL course, 2 maybe other general Python classes.
Nice.
So I sort of focused all my attention there, and it sort of became a passion of mine. And even between the final 2 years, I took a couple of internships, both of which I did in data science.
Nice.
One I did in Jordan, and one I did with the company that I'm actually working in full time now.
Yeah, definitely. So I like that you mentioned that you did a specialization and the coursework helped you make that shift. And this is, I think, a great tip to graduate students or people that are currently in university, that always try to explore different courses, because definitely you don't have a clear idea of I'm gonna do this 100%. So it's always good to explore different areas, different courses, and try to get a sense of what you're gonna do in these courses, and then how's that gonna help you with your career. So you mentioned that you managed to get an internship in Georgia, where you studied, and you did your internship at Cognira, which is a retail analytics company. So can you tell international students or minority students who are studying in the US, UK, or even anywhere, how did you manage to find that internship, given that you were also competing from people from various countries and even people that have a US citizenship or US citizens?
Yeah, so I think what put me in a good position is that I was in a very good university.
Yeah.
And it's a university that facilitates or helps facilitate you getting a job or an internship. So the way I actually got my internship is through one of their career fairs. They host a few career fairs every year, and I go to pretty much everyone. And you just put yourself out there. You talk to recruiters. I'll probably talk to more than 30 or 40 recruiters. Out of these 40, I got probably 5 interviews, which is okay. Like,
nice.
you talk to 40 or 50 knowing that you probably would get only 5.
Definitely.
But that's okay. And that's how I got the job offer. That's how I got the internship. It's a very useful tool. And I've heard different students have different experiences with career fair, but if you have a chance, if your university hosts a career fair, I would definitely advise to go to it, and just, even if you don't get an interview, the experience with that you talking to recruiters, I feel like really helps.
Yeah.
And the next time you'll be even more confident. And I think your confidence levels really help your chances of actually landing the internship.
Definitely, yeah. I really like that you mentioned career fairs, especially in US schools. There's a lot of emphasis on how they contribute to you finding a job, because it's kind of a first round mini interview where they just want to see you, how you behave in real life and what's your interest. So a good tip would be also, if there's a career fair, maybe read about the top 5-10 firms that align with your interests, and make sure you tell them, I have these skills, I think they match what you need, and I think I can contribute in that way. So definitely. I think that's a great point. What I'd like to know more about now is, tell me a bit about how you use data science in Cognira, and then maybe we can shift into telling us a bit more about your role there as a data scientist.
Okay, so the project I'm currently working in is a client project with a company called Lululemon. It's mainly a women's outwear clothing company. What we do for them, I'm part of a team that forecasts the demand for their core products.
Core products.
So essentially, there's a core rebuy and replenishment program where they put orders 6 months and 10 months in advance before they're sent to the market. And we are responsible for predicting or forecasting for that demand, such that they make sure there's no lost sales or they're not overstocked and their money gets stuck in inventory.
Okay, that's a great start to defining the role. Can you a bit tell me about the steps of an engagement with a client, and with a focus on what do you exactly do, and maybe briefly mention the whole cycle, but with a focus on what you actually do as a data scientist?
Okay, and I'll try to be simple here because it can be a bit complicated. So it all starts when the business team from our company, the sales, meet with the client. they decide on a project, the budget, the goal, the objective, and those objectives get relayed to us.
Briefly to touch on that, the objective is like a business objective. So we
Correct.
want to decide when to launch a promotion for this campaign, or like a price discount for that campaign.
Yeah, and
Okay.
in our case, it's when this model goes to deployment.
Yeah. And then
And then, from my perspective, I work with their teams. The first team I work with is the data engineering team. They prepare the data, they provide the data to us. And as a data scientist, I go in, I inspect the data, I look at the patterns in their sales, and all in the perspective of trying to build a model to predict for those products. So I go in, I sort of try to understand the patterns, what is happening, and then I start building the machine learning model. So I tune the model, I build it, I customize this model to their data.
yeah.
And then the output is the predictions. And I go back, once the model is complete, I go back to the business team at Lululemon. I present the results, which are predictions, and then I show them how the model actually performs. And more often than not, we show them something called a time series plot, which basically plots their sales,
Yeah.
and then it plots the model's predictions.
Makes sense. So like time on the x-axis, sales.
Correct.
And then you have actuals, and then you have the model. And then there's a certain point where the model is only predicting because you don't have actuals
Exactly.
or like data for those dates.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I get their feedback on the model's performance. If it meets their expectations, then the model goes to deployment. If not, I go back and iterate back on the model. I try to improve it more, and then go back to the business.
Makes sense.
When it goes to deployment, it's sort of handed off to a team called the MLOps team. We still work with the MLOps team to make sure that it's a smooth transition, but it's mainly their responsibility to get the model to deployment.
Like fully maintain it,
Yeah.
etc. Okay. And then to briefly touch on that or dig a bit deeper, so what you usually do is bring the data in Python. You have these so-called data frames or tables. You look at variables, identify important variables that you need for your machine learning model. Once you have these variables, you, let's say, form new tables that are called tables for the machine learning model. You start testing with past data. You predict events that already happened just to match the performance of your model to what actually happened. And then you proceed to the other phases that you mentioned. Perfect. Thank you.
That's
Thank you
really
for your
cool.
answer.
No worries. Especially when you're working with a large company, it becomes a bit more difficult because the size of the data becomes very, very big.
Yeah.
We're talking about billions and billions of rows of data.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful. You have to interact with multiple teams. There's usually a team that's responsible for the database, for example, a team that's responsible for different parts of the process.
Okay.
So as a data scientist, you would be interacting with multiple teams, sort of organizing everything. And it's the main struggle, I would say, for data scientists that are in my position is to make the model scale.
Scalable, yeah. So when you say you interact with different teams, are these on the client side or within Cognira, like teams that are...
That's a very good question. And it sort of depends on the role you have. So me personally, I'm full-time on the client project, on Lululemon.
Yeah.
But I know some of my colleagues in Cognira have different responsibilities and they mainly interact with only people from Cognira. But from my perspective, I mainly work with Lululemon.
Okay.
And most of my time is spent with teams in Lululemon, not in Cognira.
So when you say database, then they have
Yeah.
a couple of data engineers within Lululemon, so they're Lululemon employees
Yeah.
that you work with. And I guess there's some kind of difficulty with that where you have to align on the data type and how you're going to store it. So definitely communication skills, I'm assuming, are very important to interact, agree on the data type, the process, because it's a very long process with a lot of back and forth. So what I'd like to know more about now is the tools that you use. Let's say there's a project. If you can walk me through one of the tools that you use the most and what skills do you need to be able to be fluent with that tool or platform if it's AWS.
So I'll answer this question in an interesting way. I would say half of my work is actually dependent on my communication skills and actually presenting the work you have.
Okay.
The other half is actually coding. So half of the time I spent in meetings talking about the code. The other half I spend actually talking about the code itself. And if I focus in on the coding, the main tool I use is something called Jupyter Hub. It's a place where it's mainly for Python code, but that's a platform that's cloud-based that uses cloud resources. I use it to pull in data from the database, use cloud-based resources from AWS to process the data.
Yeah.
And then I save it back to the cloud, which is S3 buckets. Again, another tool used by AWS.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of complex terms that Bahjat mentioned. But to break it down, you basically have this place where you do the code, you type the code. This place has access to the database where you store the data. You apply certain cleaning methodologies, filtering methodologies, then you have the data set. You start applying machine learning, and that's where it gets interesting, where there's a lot of back and forth, testing machine learning models, etc., etc. Fair. What I'd like to know a bit more about now is the interview process. So what were the steps and how did you prepare for each steps, and what tips do you have in terms of resources you used for any graduates interested in working at Cognira or as a data scientists in general?
So I would say the experience for every student could be different. My experience, because I got hired through the career fair, my first point of contact was actually at the career fair. I talked with a recruiter, and always something I recommend is getting the contact information of the person you talk to. Sending them a follow-up email right after. Actually, in my case, I didn't get the official interview until after a few months.
Really?
So I sent him a follow-up email, didn't get anything back, and then I sent him another message a few months after, just asking him if the position is still open, if he remembers me, and I did. We set up a meeting, and to prepare for that meeting, I sort of looked through the position, what they sort of are looking for, and just prepared some questions for the recruiter that I'm interested to know about the company, the position, and always ask questions. It's important for you to know more about the company, but it's also good for the recruiter to see that you're interested and you're asking the right questions.
Definitely.
And
so that was the first kind of behavioral screening phase, let's call it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, I've also had different interviews that didn't come from the career fair. My senior year, to be honest, I think I applied to more than 100 different positions online.
Yeah.
So I would say definitely, as you're approaching your senior year, when you're looking for a job or an internship, just apply a lot. And for international students, like I think you outlined this before, it's harder to get a job, especially in the US. A lot of companies only look for US citizens.
Yeah.
If you're not a US citizen, you require something called a sponsorship, which demotivates some companies from hiring you because it might be just a short-term process where even if they like you, you might not be eligible to stay in the US for a long time, for forever, for example.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So there's a lot to digest here, but I like that you mentioned, first of all, apply in a mass volume in terms of applications, because that increases the probability that you actually land this first phase that you mentioned, which is just the screening phase. But can you also walk us through what happened after in terms of any technical interviews, and how did you prepare for those as well? So after the screening phase.
So in my experience, you look at the job position. The one I applied for had SQL, had Python, AWS, and I was quite confident in my abilities in those tools. So when the technical interview came, I just made sure that I'm up to date. I sort of remember everything because I was quite confident that any question I'd be able to answer. And obviously from company to company it differs, but for Cognira it's actually more focused on the personality itself. So I had, I think, 1 technical interview and 3 non-technical interviews.
Wow.
And I would say for the other interviews, just be yourself, trying to be confident. For an international student at that stage, I'm sure you've gone through a lot, you've accomplished a lot. So be confident in your abilities. I think that's the main thing that changed throughout my years, because I was applying for internships the first year and for a full-time position the last year.
Yeah.
The main difference is my level of confidence on my capabilities. And like I said, if you're a person, an international student that got to that position, you probably have what it takes to land that job. Just be confident about it.
Yeah, so I like that you said that you never know what they really want to test. So just be confident, be yourself, and if you have because in some job postings they have like a required and then like additional skills. So
Correct.
even if you don't have all of the required, if you have like the basic ones, like you said, be confident, know more about the company, prepare the questions. So that's definitely a fair point. So sorry,
I was gonna add, that's also what I look for, because next month I'm going to be actually part of the career fair from the other perspective.
Nice.
I'm going to be the hiring side, hiring for data science positions in Cognira. So when a student comes up to me, that's what I look for.
Makes
It's
sense.
more of a personality, because especially I think in data science, I mean, the first 2 years I spent just in data engineering, but I think it's more looking for the potential. If a person looks confident, if he did a lot of things that I feel like are quite related, that doesn't have to be
Relevant, yeah.
exactly, you give him an interview.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So if you're in Georgia and if you're in Georgia Tech and you're watching this, then there you go. That you have someone that you know there, and definitely always keep in touch. Follow up. I like that you said you didn't get an answer the first time, and there's like 3 months or 3 weeks.
3 months, yeah.
3 months, and then you sent another follow up, and by chance they actually needed someone for that role. So that's also a great tip. Always follow up. Have that follow up email thread ready, and just send it whenever a certain period of time passes by.
So you really have to do your research, and I would say throughout your degree, try and actually allocate some time on looking at the legalities of the visa, the employment authorization before, after you graduate, and actually also during the degree. And I can give actually an example of some law that, in my eyes, doesn't make much sense.
That would be great. Yeah.
For example, if you are doing a bachelor's degree and you graduate, you have 3 years after of something called OPT, which is, I believe, operational practical training.
Yeah.
Which is just post graduate employment, and you can work for 3 years. After that, you can actually get a master's degree and work for another 3 years.
Okay.
But if you stack them, so if you get a bachelor's degree
And
then
directly
get a master's degree, you can only work for 3 years instead of 6.
Okay.
So that's just one example of, and that's what I'm doing right now. I got my bachelor's, I'm working. If I don't get the visa, then I'm gonna go take a master's and then work for another 3 years.
Makes sense, which is pretty smart. I'll say, like, if you want to do a master's degree, it's always better to work a bit before to know if there's a skill you want to develop, or if there's an area you want to specialize in. Get a gist of your interest, of how the job market in your field looks like, and then do the master's. So it's anyway actually a very good path to consider when it comes to doing a master's degree, which is don't do it directly after your bachelor's degree. And then one last question is, if you have one piece of advice to graduates that want to stay in the US, or let's say they studied in the US, they want to stay in the US, or they studied in the UK, want to stay in the UK, but in your case, let's make the answer more US relevant. What would that be? Is it do an internship? Is it? I think it's do an internship, but I want to hear your opinion.
It's going to be a bit more general. I would say put yourself out there. So look for opportunities, look for experiences that you can see. Internships is a very good example. I also did undergraduate research. It's just, if you land a good university, if you're in a good university, chances are they have a lot of opportunities for students.
Definitely.
Career fairs, research, internships. These are all fall under the category of opportunities. So keep your eyes open, put yourself out there, and I'm sure you'll find something that matches your skill set, matches your interest, and puts your career on the right track.
Makes sense. So like leverage the network that the university has, the career center has, the alumni group has, and just try to use that for your own benefit. Network as much as possible. think that's a great tip. And I want to thank you a lot for your time. And don't forget to watch us in the next episode.